Okay, lovely. I'll start that again. Welcome everybody to our very first Nasio speaker event. It's lovely to see so many of you here today. My name is Nick and I'm the fundraising and marketing manager here at Nasio. And this is the first live Zoom event that I've hosted, so you're going to have to bear with us if there are any technical hitches, but fingers crossed everything will go nice and smoothly for us. For those of you who may not be familiar with the Nasio Trust, we are a small charity and we work to support vulnerable children and orphans out in Western Kenya. Okay, so just to let you all know, if you're not already aware, we are recording today's session. So with that in mind, you might want to switch your cameras off, totally up to you. But what I will ask now is that everybody now please make sure that they have got their microphones on mute, because in a few moments time we'll hand over to Dick and we don't want to interrupt him when he's in mid-flow. Okay, so I'm delighted to welcome Dick today, who's going to be talking to us about his caving exploits. We're going to have a session at the end of Dick's talk, so we'll be able to do some questions and answers. So while you're having a listen to Dick's talk, please type any questions that occur to you into the chat function. You can find the chat button at the very bottom of your screen in the middle. You can type your questions in there and Dick will answer them at the end of the talk. All right, so I'll hand you over now to Dick. Thank you very much. Dick?
Yeah, no, I'm just fiddling around with sharing screens. Hopefully everybody can now see that. So, right, I'll crack on. I'm an avid listener to the science pods on the radio, and a few years ago I saw this one come up, What's Left to Explore. And having spent most of my life doing big cave expeditions or participating in big cave expeditions all over the world, I thought, well, that'll be good. So I listened to it and I was deeply, deeply disappointed because it was all about this. Well, it will be if I can get it to change. Why aren't you working on my button? There we are. It was all about space. Now, I'm not saying that we can't explore space, because obviously it's a major exploration frontier, but it won't be anything that happens in my lifetime, or I suspect anybody who's actually watching this PowerPoint. I was really disappointed that it didn't include what I'd describe as inner space, caves, the only remaining physical exploration space left on the planet, in my opinion, because we can remotely sense almost everything else. So if I tell people that I'm a caver, 99% of people respond by saying, oh, God, I couldn't do that. Yuck, it's horrible. It's all tight and scrotty and muddy and everything else. And they're not wrong. It can be tight and scrotty and muddy and everything else. And here's a picture of my friend Rob Evis in a cave in Derbyshire. He's doing what cavers in Britain do a lot of, which is called digging. So cave passages get filled with sediments and muds, and the cavers dig that away to try and get through to open passage beyond. And Rob is a particular proponent of doing this, but it doesn't have to be like that at all. If you travel elsewhere, caves can be big and spectacular like this one. This is Deer Cave in the Mula National Park in Sarawak in Borneo. And it was for many years considered to be the largest cave passage in the world. It's about 200 meters high, and you can see a couple of cavers here. They don't really give you scale of the entrance, which is quite a long way. I just want to point out this slope here, which is entirely made of bat poo, because I'm going to come back to talk about that later. So caves don't have to be horrible and small and scrotty. They can also be absolutely spectacular and huge. So what are they? Well, caves mostly, not entirely, but mostly are made of limestone. Limestone is a rock formed by the consolidation of the millions and millions of shells of small sea creatures, which get laid down on the bed of the sea, covered up by more and more until the pressure turns them into rock. And they're laid down in what like beds. So if you look at limestone sideways on, it looks like a stack of mattresses, some thin beds, some thick beds, some massive beds. And some of you might have seen this. Is the Picos de Europa, a mountain chain made almost entirely of limestone, which runs across the north coast of Spain. And sitting between myself, my friend Hugh here, and the far side, there's a gorge, the Carries Gorge down here. And these mountains are riddled with caves, and the water in those caves is trying to get out of resurgences, springs at the bottom of this gorge. So on this side, the north side of the gorge, Oxford University and Spanish cavers have been exploring caves for a long time. And on this side, the south side, Lancaster University and other British groups and Spanish cavers have been exploring for many years. Some fantastic caves out there. So they're made of limestone. And what happens? Well, if you've got limestone, limestone is soluble in water, particularly slightly acidic water. So if you have a mixture of limestone and lots of vegetation and lots of rain, the rain falls on the vegetation and the trees and the bushes and the vegetation, the stuff in the soil, make it slightly acidic with carbon dioxide. That water trickles into cracks in the rocks and begins to eat away at the limestone. That entrance there that you can see in the distance is that very big cave I showed you just now. So that water gets into the rock and it exploits weaknesses between the beds and forms these little tiny channels. That's a candle there for scale. This is where two limestone beds have been opened apart. And over a period of time, a bit like rat runners in a city, the water chooses one of these channels as a sort of priority route, and it gets bigger and bigger and bigger. And as long as it's completely full of water, then the water eats away at the rock all the way around, and the tube gets a nice sort of vaguely cylindrical shape. We call this a phreatic tube. But if that rock gets thrust up, or the sea level and the river level drop, and air gets in, obviously it can only eat away at the bottom, in which case a trench begins to form. And we call those Vadose Trenches. So caves are made really of a combination of phreatic tubes and Vadose Trenches, modified with stalagmites growing up from the floor, caused by drips coming down from stalactites in the roof, and similar what we call flowstone material on the walls and the floor of the cave. So some of those trenches have become absolutely massive. This is a cave in China, and this passage here is 90 meters high, part of a cave system that we haven't yet fully explored, because the river in parts of it is so forceful you just can't make your way along it. So they can get massive. And then, of course, they get modified by stuff being put into them. So if there are rivers flowing into those caves, they deposit muds and gravels. Here you can see a passage. This is the original tube in the roof. The passage has been modified by the river, and then it's had layers and layers of sediment put down on top of it. Photograph here by my friend Robbie Shone back in Borneo. And if there are areas of particular weakness, particularly say where passages intersect, the walls and the floor can begin to collapse inwards. The boulders land on the floor, the water erodes away, takes them away, and a chamber forms and gets bigger and bigger. This is the biggest underground chamber in Britain. This is Gaping Gill, main chamber of Gaping Gill in Yorkshire. And the Fell Beck flows across the surface and then drops down this 90-meter shaft. And if you're a member of the general public, you can actually go down this cave twice a year, because the local caving clubs on bank holidays fit a winch, and you can go up and down in the winch and you can walk around this chamber and see what caves are really like. And it's fantastic. And I have never been down in the winch, because I know the people operating it would drop me as fast as they could just for the laugh. But they don't do that with the general public. And these chambers can get truly huge. This is a chamber called the Salverna in the Gouffre Pierre Saint-Martin, the French Pyrenees. This at the time was the biggest chamber in the world. You can just see a person there starting that patch of light, another one down here, and there are two little white figures there. The river in this cave comes in here, sinks in these boulders, and the way to the main cave, the deep cave, is up through this gallery here. And it was at the time the deepest cave in the world. This is also now a show cave, and you can come in through a tunnel on this side here and walk along a gallery on that. And you can do adventure caving trips up into this area if you wish to do so. And they can get bigger than that as well. This is arguably the biggest cave chamber in the world. This is back in the Moulin National Park, Appy Chamber, Robbie Shone's photograph. It's almost impossible to convey the scale here. This is actually not the full chamber itself. You can see a figure there. There's a figure where the lights start here, a figure here. And these photographs are made more possible by digital photography, because the photographer here has opened the shutter on his camera and then used really powerful caving lights to paint the walls with light to bring them out in the picture. It's a real skill. And only now are we really being able to convey the proper scale and shape of cave passages with photographs. So these underground chambers can get absolutely huge. And just to put them in scale for you, if that didn't do it for you, This is Gaping Gill, the red one. This is the Verna, that red circle, and the blue outline is Sarawak Chamber, that chamber in Malaysia. And that's a bunch of 747s. When we first explored Sarawak Chamber, we worked out that you could accommodate 42 747s without overlapping the wings, although you'd have a hell of a job getting them up the entrance passage. So those caves, they may be big, they may be huge, they may be tubes, they may be trenches. They get modified with stalagmite material, what we call speleothems, and they form, everybody knows that you get stalactites coming down from the roof, and you get stalagmites going up from the floor, and they can join in the middle and form columns. And these columns are truly immense. This is a cave in China, taken by my friend Jerry Wooldridge, and you've got a caver here, a caver there, a caver there. And this stuff is cloud. This cave is so big, you actually get cloud formations inside it. It has its own microclimate. And caves they're interesting places. In the tropics, there isn't really very much cave life because there isn't much energy going into the cave. The stuff that gets carried in is largely detritus coming in on streams in floods, and that feeds very small populations. Insects get carried in by water, for example. That feeds small populations of very generally slow-moving, energy-conserving species. But in the tropical caves, you can get massive populations of bats and swiftlets. If you go to the Mulu National Park in Malaysia, you can, if you're lucky, because it doesn't happen every day, you can see these huge smoke rings almost of bats flying out of Deer Cave, where there are, I think we estimated somewhere around 6 million bats. And you can see these formations miles away, circling in the sky. And these bats, and also cave swiftlets, birds that live in the cave, fly out to the forest. They feed in the forest, feeding on insects, and the insects then, and then they fly back into the cave and they poo all over the cave, hence my comment right at the beginning of this talk. So you begin to get this lovely energy cycle where the sunlight feeds the vegetation, insects feed on the vegetation, the birds and the bats feed on the insects, they fly into the cave and they poo in the cave, and the poo and the dead bats and birds form an energy source for all sorts of other life forms. Those big tropical caves have massive populations of insects in them, like this cockroach. And if you're wondering why it's got a number 5 on it, it's because it's part of an experiment, what we call a mark recapture experiment, to try and estimate the size of the cockroach population. And of course, those insects themselves provide a food source for other things like this huntsman spider. This one's about the same size as one's hand. They're quite exciting things if you're climbing a cave and you put your hand on a ledge and you put your hand on one of these things instead. But they don't generally bite, but they're just a little bit unnerving if they run across you. There are some very, very nasty centipedes living in these caves as well, and they do bite and they really hurt. But you also get animals that feed directly on the birds and the bats. So this slightly confusing photograph by my friend Phil Chapman, I need to explain. This is a stalactite coming down from the roof of the passage. The passage is a major entry route for birds, swiftlets and bats flying into one of the big caves, Clearwater Cave in Mulu. And cave racer snakes climb up the walls and across the roof. Don't ask me how they do that because they haven't got legs. Wrap themselves around the stalactites and then hang in the passageway, waiting for the birds and the bats to come through. And they detect them using heat-sensitive pits on their noses, and they're able to capture the bird or the bat in flight. So to explain, here is the snake coming down, that's the snake's head, and here is a swiftlet caught in flight. I put it in because it's one of the most extraordinary photos I've ever seen, and I could have stood in that place for eternity with a camera and a flash gun and never got that photograph. And Phil Chapman, who has the luck of the devil, happened to be there at the right moment. So you get quite big animals in caves, but what we also know is that you get microbes in caves. Once upon a time, we thought that the deep cave environment didn't have any life in it at all. But we now know that actually the surfaces are covered in bacteria and fungi. And this is either a Hazel Barton or a member of her research group. Hazel's a British caver who's now resident in the States. and her research team look at microbial populations in caves and study them and bring them out and identify them. And actually, they're very, very important because they could potentially be the source of new antibiotics, and we desperately need new antibiotics. But those microbes are themselves food sources for other creatures. And this is a press report from the discovery of a cave in Romania, which have been sealed, they estimate, for about 5.5 million years, where there is no energy coming in from the sun's rays outside. And the microbes in there exist on sulfur compounds, and they're fed upon by insects, which themselves are fed upon by other predatory species. So an entire life system, an entire system within a sealed cave based not on the sun's energy, but on chemical energy. And some people postulate that this might have been the origin of life on Earth, chemical energy, not solar energy. But of course, you have to get around in caves. And one of the biggest, or the two biggest things stopping us getting around in caves are water, as I've alluded to before, and also verticality. This is a photograph of my friend Kath Jones, and she's dropping this shaft, this vertical drop we call a shaft. This is in daylight. She's dropping down here to see if the passage at the bottom could be explored. It's a cave in China, which to my knowledge has never been explored. And we now use a technique called single rope techniques. We used to use wire ladders, but with wire ladders, they break and you have to carry a safety rope. So we did away with the ladders and we use a single rope. You have to be very careful how you rig it, how you fix it to the cave walls, because if you have the weight of a cave on it and it rubs against the rock, then it can very quickly wear through and leave you in a very difficult position altogether. And these days we use bolts and portable drills in the caves to fix the rope securely to the walls of the cave to make sure that it doesn't wear through. So verticality can be a problem, but so too can big water supplies. But water can also be an asset. And this is a photograph taken in central Java in an area called Gunung Siwu, the Thousand Hills, because it has these conical hills like upturned egg boxes. This area is underlain by limestone, and it's dry for about 7 months of the year. And in the wet season, the water is trapped by the local people in these semi-artificial lakes, and they become the water supply in the dry season. So you have here's a talaga. It's relatively full. It's used for livestock, for people, for washing, for cooking. It's used for everything. And over the dry season, gradually the water supply shrinks and people resort to using wells alongside. And they dry out as well in many places. And the local people have to walk for maybe 2 hours every morning and evening to collect water from places where it's sustained. And the UK government paid for an overseas aid project for a long time for a civil engineering company to try and sink wells in this area. And they were remarkably unsuccessful because in limestone, the water runs in caves in discrete channels, and your chance of hitting one is quite remote, until one of their guys noticed that people were collecting water from caves. And we had a 2-year project going out there, surveying the caves, mapping and surveying the caves to try and find water supplies. So here's my colleague, Tony Waltham. He's using a thing called a mole phone. Now you can't use radio waves through rock, but you can use magnetic fields through rock. So Tony's carrying this device here, and it's emitting a magnetic signal. And down below him in the cave underneath is a team of people with one of these sitting in the middle of a stream, and his receiver is picking up their signal, and he walks backwards and forwards listening for the signal, and at the loudest point he drives a stake into the ground. The engineers come along and they dig a well, and the people in that area can then access water without these huge long walks that they get. And there's plenty of water in that area underneath, but it has to be found, although you can only exploit it directly when it's less than 20 meters, because otherwise it's too difficult to get it out. Some people watching this will be old enough to remember a Blue Peter appeal many years ago where they collected bottle tops to pay for pumps. This was the area in which they did it. They put the pumps in, but unfortunately there was no money to maintain them. So they don't provide a decent source of drinking water in the long term. So caves have got a long history for human beings as well, not only as places where our ancestors took shelter or painted rock art, but also they disposed of stuff, including their own sort of remains, and we can get a lot of data, a lot of evidence about human history from caves. This is actually from a cave in Gloucestershire, and this is a bone that's interestingly been split long ways rather than normal bone breaks, which are across the long bone. And you can see here, this is a recent bone with marrow in it. So this is evidence that the occupants of this cave, or those who live nearby, were cannibals. And we can get an awful lot of interesting data about human history in caves in this way. But caves are repositories of all sorts of data. So this is a stalagmite which has been cut open, and you can see here that it's a bit like cutting through a tree section. It's in rings, and it gets laid down by drips coming down, and at different times of year, different years, those drips are stronger than others. So these layers form, and the layers trap gases between them, very small quantities, but they're there anyway. An analysis can give us a balance of the gases in the atmosphere at the time it was laid down. So we can get data on past carbon dioxide levels from stalactites and stalagmites in the cave. But we can also get a lot more data from speleothems, from stels. So this is hopefully you can follow this. If you look at the diagram up here, this is rock. This is the limestone in which a cave is formed. And as I described earlier, oops, sorry, go back one. As I described earlier, sediment gets laid down in the cave in different formats, perhaps containing quartz crystals. Muds get laid down on that, and speleothems, stalagmites, may form on the top of that. And we can use different scientific techniques to find out the age of those layers. So stalagmite samples, we can measure the uranium and lead in them, or the uranium and thorium, and the balance of those nucleotides can give us a date for the age of the cave. In muds, we can use a technique called paleomagnetic analysis, because mud contains often little tiny iron particles which lie down, they get laid down a bit like compass needles pointing north and south, and the north-south axes of the Earth flip from time to time, which is a bit of a mind bender to me. And also quartz, which goes into the caves. Quartz contains a balance of aluminium and beryllium, and that they shift between the two in exposure to sunlight. So at the point the quartz goes underground, it stops changing between the two. And if we can measure the balance of the two, we know how fast it changes, and we know how fast it doesn't change. So we can get a measure of the age. And obviously, the rock, the cave formation, is older than the last layer we can date. So we can get an awful lot of history, data about the history of the Earth and the development of that area from caves. So they're like repositories of past data on the Earth. And that can give us information about our own climate in the past. This is a flooded cave in the Bahamas. And you can see here that there are stalactite columns. Stalactites do not form underwater. So when these were formed, the cave was exposed to air and the sea level was lower. And by measuring the dates of the components of the cave, we can get a measure of the sea level, which can give us data on likely rises of sea level if we continue to allow CO2 in the atmosphere to keep rising and the Earth to keep warming. And that study is done all over the place. Another Robbie shown photograph here. These are probably the most northerly explored caves in the world. These are in northeast Greenland. And we're getting dating information from these caves, which exceeds the dating information from the Greenland ice cores. So we get lots of very valuable data. Caves are not just places to explore. They're repositories of data about the Earth's history. But exploration, of course, is a driving, motivating factor for lots of people, including me. And it would be remiss of me not to say that accidents don't happen in caves. This is my friend Steve Crabtree. Steve was a geologist on our expedition to Papua New Guinea many years ago, and he was in a cave walking along, studying the roof of the cave, and forgot to look where he was going. And he went straight over an 8-meter drop head first, broke off a chunk of rock with his head and fractured his skull, which gave us a bit of a medical dilemma because he was unconscious for 2 days. And had we evacuated him by helicopter, which we probably should have done, it would have bankrupted the expedition. So our doctor, John Buchan, made a very brave decision, and we monitored his life signals for 2 days until he recovered. and I'm pleased to say he's done very well for himself. But actually, cave accidents are very rare. The British Cave Research Council, which monitors cave rescues in Britain, recorded about 80 events last year, of which only 15 were in caves, and 5 of those were animal rescues. And I'd suggest that if you've got a child who's interested in horses, that child would be better off going caving than horse riding, because I think the accident rates are much higher. So adventure's a motivating factor for many people, and including for me. And I have to say, there's nothing like the buzz of being the first person, the first set of footsteps across a passage like this. This is one of my favorite cave photos taken by my friend Jerry Waldridge quite a long time ago in Mulu, and one of our Malaysian cavers working with us there, Simon Lagan. A most fantastic cave showing some of the beauty of the rock itself, not the formations, but the actual rock formations, the way in which the cave has eroded the cave. But you don't have to go to places like that. This is the largest cave chamber in Britain by floor area, not by space, because look, there's the roof, not like Gaping Gill. And this is in Mendip. This is only about 30 miles away from me. And it was found a few years ago. And it wasn't found by a bunch of muscle-bound university freaks who are cave fitness fanatics, carting huge rucksacks around the mountains. It was found by these guys and their friends. And I think only one of those is under 60. I'm not going to point out which one it was. And what this shows really is perseverance and teamwork, because that cave was dug into largely. It was very much filled with sediment. It was dug into over a period of years by teams of cavers, including these guys here. And it really exemplifies that caving is teamwork. It's not about an individual or any individual, although the media may try and make that out. It's by cavers working together, cavers rescuing each other if they need to, cavers collaborating on research, cavers having a good time exploring. So if the BBC ever do it again and they say what's left to explore, I'd like to tell them they're dimwits, because they could do the caves. And these are some of the photographers that contributed to this this presentation. I hope they don't mind me using their slides. So thanks very much. If I stop now, hopefully I'll be able to see any questions that people have got, and I hope you've enjoyed that.
That was brilliant. Thank you, Dick.
Right, so I need to be able to see the questions now, which I can't.
So you need to click on your
I can
chat
see.
button.
Hold on. Let me enlarge that. Oh, so Nick Imry's asked me, asked everybody actually, but what's the scariest cave experience of outboard caving? Many years ago, in that cave in the Gouffre Saint-Pierre in France. Sorry, I'm just trying to minimize this slightly. We were caught, a couple of friends of mine and I were caught at the bottom of the cave by a flash flood, and we very nearly didn't get out. But we did get out, so we lived to tell the tale afterwards. So that's that one. What's my favorite cave to go to? It's a cave called Clearwater Cave in Malaysia. It's probably the biggest cave passage, or the biggest cave in the world by volume. It's 220 kilometers long and still going, but the passages are immense in parts of it. And we've had a program of exploring that cave since 1978, and I've had a number of trips out there. And when I die, then part of my ashes are going to be put into the river that feeds into that cave, so I can do the first through trip, go in at one end and come out the other. Have you ever stayed overnight in a cave? Yeah, lots and lots of times, Julia. Thank you very much. I've done lots of camping in caves. You have to in the big caves. And actually, sometimes, certainly in the tropics, they are better places to stay than outside, because you don't get the biting insects. But what you do have are the birds and the bats flying in, so you have to make sure you don't sleep on your back with your mouth open. What inspired me to start caving? Accident. I came to university here in Bristol. I joined the diving club. I did all my dive training. I made a wetsuit, which you had to do in those days. I then pulled a muscle in my back and the doctors wouldn't let me go on my first dive. And a friend of mine came into my room and said, well, you've got a wetsuit, come caving. And I did. And I never went diving again, unfortunately. but I went caving a lot ever since. What's the oldest cave? Do you know, I don't know. I don't think I can answer that one, but it will be a lot older than we expect. The caves in Borneo, then I think the dates that we got for that were well over 1 million years, and potentially, because there are always errors in these old dating techniques, parts of the cave at the very, very top, which are the oldest parts of the cave, could be approaching 4 million years old. But we probably need more data to confirm that. So next time, hold on, sorry. That's it. I think, oh, I've got another one. No, that's a bit of flattery, another bit of flattery, another bit of flattery, too much flattery, not really. What's the longest caving expedition you've been on? I was in New Guinea for 4.5 months in 1975, my first big expedition. I should have been there for 6, but I came back early to go on a climbing expedition, which I couldn't go on because there was a recession and I couldn't earn the money to go, which is a bit of a shame. Are there any caves on Mars? Good question, Jonathan. Well, they think there are. And I made a passing reference earlier on to the fact that we can remotely sense anywhere on the Earth's surface apart from caves. At the moment, if you go exploring caves, then around the next bend in the cave passage is uncharted territory, not just for you, but if it's a new cave for everybody. And there's no way of finding out a way around it. But actually, the NASA and other bodies are looking at remotely sensing devices that could find their way into caves, because on the moon and almost certainly on Mars, one of the places that human beings might use to take shelter when they get there to get away from cosmic radiation are caves. So if we can explore them at a distance, we can find out what prospects there are for shelter for there. Do I think there are any more large limestone caves found? Undoubtedly, that's the short answer. Bigger passages in Britain than there are, longer passages in Britain than we know about now, smaller passages in Britain than we know about now, but plenty of big caves. There's some fantastic caving being done in Vietnam, in I can say Myanmar, but that's a bit tricky at the moment. All over Indochina, there are big caves, massive amounts of caving in China itself, in Central Asia. Yeah, there's loads more opportunity to find caves. Somebody's put a link up there to the oldest bit of cave passage, apparently. Genland caves. Yeah, I'm not sure what Genland are actually, but no, they're in Australia. Jonathan Evans, am I still caving? I'm not, Jonathan. That's a trick question because you know I'm not. I turned into an old croc, and I stagger a bit in caves because I had a mild stroke a couple of years ago, and if I fell over in a cave, I'd have to die, because if I didn't die and had to get rescued, I would never, ever live it down. People would take the mickey out of me. So there, I've got a direct message from Martin Palethorpe there. Where is it? I can't see it. I can't see that one, Martin. So, yeah, where is it?
Yeah. Thank you, Dick. Thank you.
My pleasure. Hopefully that's given you a taste for it. And at some stage, you'll have a chance to go and see somebody else do a presentation. Or if you go on YouTube and you look up Sid Peru, then Sid Peru is one of the premier cave filmmakers ever, and all of his films are now on YouTube, free to anybody to watch. They're just fantastic, and it's a pity he never made any money out of them. So there, thank you very much. Been a pleasure.
Thank you,
Dick. Brilliant.
Thanks, Paul.
Thank you. Okay, I'm just going to finish off here. So thanks, Dick. There were some great questions there as well. I'm just going to share my screen. Hopefully everyone can see that. Just to say, for those of you watching who, like Dick, have a real thirst for adventure, then you might be interested to know that at Nasio we provide Kilimanjaro climb packages. So you can experience the adventure of a lifetime climbing Kili while supporting our charity in the process. So I just want to say an enormous thank you again to Dick. You've been so interesting. It's been fascinating listening to you. And thank you for giving up your time for free today. I hope everyone's enjoyed listening to the talk. If you have done, and you'd like to show your appreciation, then we'd be enormously grateful if you'd donate £1 or £2 to the Nasio Trust. You can see the web address for this on the screen here. And I've also included our email address. We love hearing from people, so do get in touch with us directly if you'd like to find out more about the work we do in Kenya, or indeed if you'd like to volunteer or fundraise for us, we'd love to hear from you. Thank you so much. So I hope you've enjoyed yourself today, and I look forward to welcoming you next month, where we will hopefully be going live to Kenya, which is exciting. We've got some other exciting talks coming up as well over the next few months, including somebody talking about conservation. So if you want to find out more about that, keep an eye out on our Facebook page, or we do send out information on our email newsletters, which will have all the details in. So if you're not signed up to receive our email newsletters and you'd like to get these, then just drop us an email or contact us via our website, and we'd be delighted to organise that for you. Thank you so much. It's been so lovely having so many people here today, and thank you again to Dick. And I'm going to wish you a happy afternoon now and sign off. Okay, thanks very much.
Thank you.
Bye. Bye.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bye.